gavel. Governors, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to call to order the 2019 annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the World Bank Group and of the International Monetary Fund. I welcome all governors representing all 189 member countries. On behalf of all participants, I would like to extend, through the Governor of the United States, our deep appreciation to the people of the United States for the warm welcome and the gracious hospitality. It is customary in these meetings to hear first from the Chair, and I shall proceed in the same way. Bulavinaka and good morning. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to the 73rd Plenary of the Boards of Governors of the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund, 75 years on from the Bretton Woods Conference, which marked the inception of these institutions and our multilateral system. I'd also like to welcome World Bank Group President David Malpass and IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva to their first plenary session in their new roles. Ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together for them and welcome them. And I want to extend our sincere gratitude to their predecessors, Jim Yong Kim and Christine Lagarde, who's here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, when our predecessors gathered in New Hampshire in the summer of 1944, the world was suffering from monumental failures of its political and economic systems. With the fires of the Second World War still raging and decades of devastating conflict behind them, those leaders rightfully shut the door on the painful folly of unilateralism. Instead, they looked to cooperation through a visionary multilateral system as the ultimate guarantor of the global peace and economic stability. And while multilateralism has shown impressive endurance over the past 75 years, recent trends have proven it is only as strong as the faith world leaders hold in global solutions. We've seen the damage that inward-looking policy-making is having on market sentiment and business confidence. As the growth of the global economy slows, those who turn away from multilateralism give way to the same forces that once drove our world into devastating conflict. We cannot dismiss the lessons of history. We cannot squander the power of global partnerships. We must harness that potential for the sake of our young people and to foster enduring cooperation between the nation-states of the world. The truth is, multilateralism matters even more today than it did in 1944. We may not be in the throes of a world war or just come out of one, but we face a threat of an even deadlier potential, the intensifying fury of a changing climate. The Bahamian and the Japanese people are the latest to suffer the tragic reality of climate change, following the suffering wrought by Hurricane Dorian and Typhoon Hagibis. In 2016, Tropical Cyclone Winston claimed the lives of 44 Fijians and within 36 hours wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP. But existential threats posed by the climate crisis are not only contained by the shorelines of island states. As the Climate Action Summit last month made clear, this threat is global. Whether it is superstorms wreaking havoc in Asia and the southern eastern regions of the United States of America, the desertification across Africa, changing weather patterns in the Mediterranean, the melting glaciers in Pakistan, or the rising seas lapping at the coastline cities of Miami to Jakarta and to Dhaka, the entire world is vulnerable. As the Fijian Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama often reminds us, we are all in the same canoe when it comes to dealing with climate change. The growing severity of the climate threat has driven us into a complex and challenging landscape. But if we show the courage and the creativity to evolve our global frameworks, there are opportunities waiting to be unlocked. In the case of small states, tragedy has taught us that economic development and climate resilience must be one and the same. The investments we make in adaptation saves lives and saves us the costs of continuous rebuilds many times over, granting our economies the resilience to bounce back after climatic events without restarting and recharting our progress. But adaptation investments are not conventional outlays. The upfront costs are far higher, and the returns pay back over far longer haul. We cannot build stronger bridges, bury electrical cables, or relocate entire communities with the expectation of immediate financial payoffs. These are investments that build long-term durability, stability, and sustainability into our economies, even as the seas rise, worsening storms bear down upon us, and changing weather patterns diminish agricultural output and food security. But the traditional metrics used to measure debt sustainability do not capture the intrinsic benefits of adaptation, nor the opportunity cost of failing to build resilience now. This narrow focus has forced some states to make the impossible choice between what is currently considered debt sustainability and desperately needed investments in adaptation. It is becoming clear that the old frameworks for measuring debt sustainability cannot stand the heat of a warming world. With every notch in global temperature rise, these systems will struggle to address climate realities that were never designed to solve. We need to recalibrate and revamp the development finance architecture to keep pace with the rapid changes in our climate and the resulting effects on nation-states. The indisputable benefits of adaptation must form the basis of new metrics and measure of debt sustainability. MDBs and financial institutions must sharpen the frameworks they employ to assess a nation's ability to service debt and recognize that debt-to-GDP ratio is never the full story. Asset values and other underlying indicators in our economy should be considered, and the system must accurately reflect the rising costs of climate impacts and the long-term value of effective adaptation. The World Bank Group and the IMF must keep those realities top of mind when redesigning finance frameworks. I urge the new leadership of the World Bank Group and the IMF to give this issue urgent attention. The world's larger economies must also continue to play their role to grow the pool of accessible and affordable finance, and we look forward to the replenishment of IDA 19 and beyond. But even the full weight of public sector finance, coupled with MDB financing, cannot fill every gap in resilience. We must also enlist the resources, the expertise, and the ingenuity of the private sector. As ministers for finance and economy and leaders of financial institutions, it is on us to bring innovation to this conversation. Our business-as-usual mentality has unlocked only a tiny fraction of private finance in the adaptation space. Let's re-engineer the conventions. Let's market the real opportunities in resilient investments. Let's ramp up liquidity support and credit guarantees. Let's create new markets for insurance. Let's develop new means of assessing risks. And let's build new tools and make smarter use of the ones already at our disposal. International financial institutions can also wield their convening power to leverage support from new partners, investment funds, sovereigns, and philanthropic organizations to lighten the burden of the costs on nations without disrupting the securities market. We can also encourage conscientious investing that supports resilient sustainability. These are vital pathways to a vibrant and resilient global economy. Only by building resilience can we bring certainty to economies, empower growth, and create the stable and growing demand for goods and services that fuels domestic, regional, and international markets. My fellow governors, the Bretton Woods system undoubtedly restored stability to the international economic order in the aftermath of World War II. But we are not living in the world as it was in 1944. Our world is rapidly warming. New inequalities are rising, and the climate crisis is exposing those gaps and in some cases ripping them wide open. We need to bring new tools, new perspectives, and new mindsets to tackling our world's greatest development challenges. If we do so, we are confident that at the ripe age of 75, our rules-based multilateral system will still be agile enough to live up to its highest founding ideals and indeed leave no nation behind. Vinakabakalevу, and thank you very much. At this time, I would now like to call on the President of the World Bank Group, Mr. Malpass, to address the governors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Syed Kayum, and thank you also to IMF Managing Director Georgieva, to governors and distinguished guests. Thank you for joining us at the annual meetings. I'd like to welcome former World Bank Group President James Wolfensohn, who is with us here today. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to the many other leaders in the audience for your hard work, leadership, and service. Thank you, Chairman, for your remarks. The delegates who gathered at the Bretton Woods Conference 75 years ago faced great uncertainty. War was raging in Europe and the Pacific. The world had been hammered for over a decade by high tariff barriers, depression, and war. At the conference, as the conference opened, U.S. Treasury Secretary Morgenthau said the new global system should be based on two ideas. First, there's no limit to prosperity. Second, broadly shared prosperity benefits everyone. He expressed hope for a dynamic world economy where people of every nation have an opportunity to raise their own standards of living and enjoy increasingly the fruits of material progress. At the World Bank Group, we're determined to help countries make that hope a reality. Even while the global economy is facing a weak patch, here's the good news. With the right mix of policies and structural reforms, countries can still achieve growth that's broadly shared across all segments of society. We're committed to our goals of reducing extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity, goals at the core of the Bretton Woods purpose and at the core of our annual meetings. In short, we seek material impact in terms of broad-based growth, transparency, the rule of law, and private sector expansion. My time as president of the World Bank Group has reinforced my conviction about the urgency of our mission and the challenges we face. Some countries have made great strides in helping the poor, yet 1 in 12 people on the planet still lives in extreme poverty, many of them in fragile and conflict-torn places. Existing institutions often aren't able to deliver benefits to those in need, and projections for several countries show that poverty is likely to increase, not decrease. I've benefited from productive trips to developing countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Mozambique. I expect to visit India, Pakistan, Mexico, and China in coming weeks to encourage fast progress toward better policies, broad-based growth, and higher living standards for all. One of the most valuable activities has been my time spent in individual meetings with world leaders, nearly 100 heads of state since my nomination. I hear their perspectives, learn their challenges, and am encouraged by their openness to reforms that can boost growth, jobs, and incomes. One of our major undertakings is implementing the capital increase package endorsed by our shareholders in 2018. I want to take this opportunity to thank shareholders for their support, which is enabling implementation of key reforms. Many members have submitted their IBRD subscription documents, with a few members already completing their subscription payment process. I encourage other members to do so as well. I'm pleased to report today that since the IBRD capital increase reached the 75% hurdle for shareholder approval a year ago, IBRD's subscribed capital has increased by $8.7 billion. That's nearly 15% of the agreed increase. The IFC capital package is close to the required shareholder approval hurdles, and we've extended the voting period to March 18, 2020. IFC is moving to execute the capital increase package, shifting its focus to working upstream to open markets and create projects that will increase private investment in all countries, especially the poorest ones. The Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, grew significantly under its fiscal 18 through 20 strategy. Growth was driven by a deepening partnership with the bank and IFC, an increasing focus on business development and product innovation. MIGA has expanded its reinsurance to 70% of gross exposure. This will allow MIGA to sustain its growth in the medium term as global macro and business conditions evolve. We're working to increase the share of loans to those IBRD borrowers who are below the graduation threshold. As part of our country partnership frameworks for higher income IBRD borrowers, we are systematically analyzing and assessing key elements of the IBRD graduation policy. This will shift the bank's lending profile substantially, helping countries that need it the most, but also weighing on the bank's net income. We've adjusted our loan pricing, and other financial measures are underway to improve IBRD's financial sustainability. In June, the board approved a crisis buffer amount as well as an annual limit on our lending to make sure that IBRD stays financially sustainable without additional capital increases. Management is committed to cost discipline throughout the year. The expenditure review achieved $4.8 billion in expected savings over fiscal 19 through fiscal 30, and progress is being made toward achieving the additional cumulative efficiency gains of $1.8 billion from the capital package. Ensuring the International Development Association, IDA, is properly financed is a vital step in supporting the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and our development goals around the world. IDA is the world's largest and most effective platform for fighting extreme poverty. The current IDA 19 replenishment cycle, the 19th three-year cycle, is making good progress, and I'm encouraged by the engagement with donor countries. Consultations with IDA partners will continue in the coming days and months to finalize the policy package and financing framework for the IDA 19 cycle. There's an urgent need for IDA funding, and we're counting on the continued strong support of our shareholders and donor countries in funding IDA as we address these challenges. IDA 19 will expand IDA's regional program as well as increase resources for fragile situations. We expect to see poverty become more concentrated in fragile and conflict-affected states, with many refugees fleeing to countries that already struggle to deliver basic services, security, and peace to their citizens. Notably, IDA commitments to countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence reached $8 billion in fiscal 2019. Regarding peace and security, let me highlight just one of dozens of my memorable meetings. At the end of April, I met with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He described with passion his work toward peace in the region, his peacemaking trips to neighbors, and his dramatic economic program, which we are supporting with one of our biggest programs in the world. I phoned Prime Minister Abiy on Friday after he was named the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I congratulated him. Thanks in part to his efforts and to others in the region, the Horn of Africa has the chance to break out of its long period of violence. In recent weeks, I've had the chance to meet with and encourage the nearby heads of state of Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Egypt, and others at the World Bank are also meeting with South Sudan, Eritrea, and Djibouti. We can all take a moment today to look for ways to help this important region move dramatically forward toward peace. This brings me to the importance of World Bank Group personnel who bring their dedication, skills, and experience to the job every day. I've welcomed spending highly valuable time with hundreds of our development professionals. One of the most dynamic is Kristalina Georgieva. I'd like to take the opportunity now to recognize Kristalina's accomplishments and congratulate her on her appointment as Managing Director of the IMF. Congratulations, Kristalina. We will miss you across the World Bank Group. It's a loss for me and all of us, but we look forward to your strong leadership at the IMF and to working with you toward growth programs in developing countries. The transition in leadership at the bank has been fast-moving and is going smoothly. Congratulations to our new Managing Director, Axel van Trotzenberg. Many of you here know the depth of his experience and expertise, including regional operations, IDA replenishments, relationships with stakeholders, and leadership skills, to name a few. Congratulations, Axel. And congratulations also to Managing Director Anshula Kant, who started October 7th as Chief Financial Officer of the World Bank Group. Anshula brings more than 35 years of expertise in banking, finance, technology, and management, most recently as Managing Director of the State Bank of India. Welcome, Anshula. Thank you also to IFC's CEO, Philippe Leroux, for adding to his current tasks the role of co-chair of the IDA 19 replenishment, along with Antoinette Saya. And finally, I'd like to thank Keiko Honda for her 6 years of work at MIGA. We're reaching the conclusion of a broad search for her replacement, and I hope to have an update in coming weeks. Thank you, Keiko. Looking throughout the World Bank Group, we recognize the challenges of leadership transitions, but also the opportunities to focus on the mission, work hard, and benefit from change. I look for input from employees and other stakeholders. While differences of view are common and necessary for good decision-making, I'm pleased with how people are working together, and I'm confident we're well-positioned to provide solid progress on behalf of our stakeholders. IBRD, IDA, IFC, and MIGA are working together to make us more effective, efficient, and accountable. Steps include coordinating our country programs, co-locating offices, aligning staff to meet the needs of country programs, and adjusting the global footprint of the World Bank Group to increase our presence in lower-income countries. Looking forward, we face a number of development challenges. Global growth has slowed. Investment rates in developing countries aren't sufficient to meet development needs. Health systems, learning outcomes, and technology are falling further behind needs. Climate changes and extreme weather are taking a heavy toll. For some countries, populations are expanding much faster than resources and capacity, and many of our countries are facing fragility, conflict, violence, making development even more urgent and difficult. The result is that several countries are facing rising poverty rates and falling median incomes, the opposite of our mission. We're sharpening our focus on creating strong country programs to boost growth and improve development outcomes. Coordination with other MDBs, multilateral development banks, is a key part of our development work. We're encouraging better implementation of graduation and price differentiation to avoid undercutting each other's work, covenants, and standards. We're working cooperatively with countries and the development community to launch country platforms. We're working on platforms with 11 countries so far. The outcomes will be tailored to the countries and their needs and will increase the focus on private sector involvement and engagement. The goal is for the World Bank Group and the broader development community to be as effective as possible in helping countries achieve good development outcomes. In this process, countries need to provide strong leadership to choose a path that works economically, socially, and politically. It's clear that the quality of policies and institutions plays a key role in explaining why some developing countries have been able to make the leap out of poverty, while others have been unable to advance. It's also clear that development cannot be imposed from outside. Country leadership and ownership matter. Jobs and economic transformation are a key topic in the Development Committee discussions this week. Key building blocks include clean water and dependable access to electricity, markets and market pricing, especially for agricultural inputs and outputs. Key development steps are the establishment of a dependable rule of law that encourages transparency in government contracts and pensions, fights corruption, builds strong and accountable institutions, and creates a level playing field so that the private sector is allowed to compete fairly with state-owned enterprises, the military, and the government itself. The private sector must play a pivotal role in development. With official development assistance stagnant and public sector debt growing in many countries, it's critical that we pursue private sector solutions and establish an environment that attracts private investors. The World Bank's systemic country diagnostic and the IFC's country private sector diagnostic assess barriers to private sector investment and recommend ways to address them. Through the Joint Capital Markets Program, or JCAP, the IFC and World Bank are helping countries build local capital markets through reforms and investments from Bangladesh to Morocco. A big obstacle to investment is the amount of a country's sovereign and state-owned enterprise debt and the lack of transparency surrounding the debt. Public debt in emerging markets and low-income countries has risen to levels not seen since the 1980s, and too much of that debt isn't transparent. Some lenders have imposed strict non-disclosure clauses on government borrowers, required liens and collateralization, employed weaker procurement, environmental, and social standards, and paid insufficient attention to non-concessional borrowing policies that are key to emerging from poverty. When countries are transparent, they typically enjoy higher credit ratings, lower borrowing costs, and better ability to attract foreign direct investment. But we've found that fewer than half of the countries we've reviewed meet minimum requirements for debt recording, monitoring, and reporting. It's also critical to have transparency in public spending and public pensions. We support public expenditure reviews to understand gaps in service delivery relating to resource allocation decisions and process-related bottlenecks. Our development policy financing, which disperses against impactful prior policy reforms, will increasingly play a role in encouraging more transparent and sustainable borrowing practices, as well as more effective and efficient public spending and policy reforms. Transparency will help attract finance, innovation, and expertise so countries can build the infrastructure they need. They face severe deficits in clean water, electricity, roads, and telecommunications. Deficits in telecommunications reduce connectivity and undercut job creation and access to markets. Trade facilitation is a critical part of many of our country programs because the economic benefits from commerce and trade are immense, and constructive policies such as customs processing, tariff harmonization, and standardized bills of lading are achievable. We're putting substantial resources into closing the gender gap. In fiscal 2019, over 60% of combined IBRD and IDA operations helped address gender gaps and encourage full incorporation of women in economies. Globally, countries are losing $160 trillion in wealth due to differences in lifetime earnings between men and women. Later today, I'll join a panel to talk about unleashing the potential of women entrepreneurs. We're investing in capital, in human capital. More than half of all 10-year-olds in low and middle-income countries can't read, which is unacceptable. In this week's education and learning announcements, which I was pleased to join yesterday, we set a target of at least cutting learning poverty in half. We're also making important investments in health. Some of the goals: preventable maternal and child mortality, ensuring that women and children can access comprehensive health services, and reduce childhood stunting. Massive growth of cities is an inevitable part of the outlook. It presents critical challenges and opportunities for development. One key example is the design and enforcement of street grids as cities grow. The World Bank Group is helping to build sustainable cities by investing directly in urban infrastructure and helping national and municipal governments develop fiscal and financial systems to expand revenues and provide access to private capital. Climate and environment investments are a key part of the World Bank Group's work, and in fiscal 19, we committed $17.8 billion to climate-related investments. Among multilateral development banks and other international organizations, we are the single largest funder of climate action, providing almost half of the total climate-related finance. Over 30% of IBRD and IDA and IFC commitments included climate co-benefits in fiscal 2019, surpassing our target. We've doubled our climate commitment targets for fiscal 21 through 25 to $200 billion. We recently launched Pro-Green, and it's an umbrella trust fund to boost efforts to stop deforestation, restore degraded lands, and improve livelihoods in poor and rural communities. We're also working through Pro-Blue, a new umbrella multi-donor trust fund to help countries sustainably develop their blue economies. We're aggressively expanding our work on marine plastics and the prevention of marine pollution. To scale up climate-related investments, we've launched initiatives such as Scaling Solar, which is helping countries accelerate development of utility-scale solar energy plants. We're one of the biggest financiers of renewable energy and energy-efficient projects in developing countries. Advances in digital technologies are another critical development path. A decline in transaction costs is particularly beneficial for new entrants to markets, women, small businesses, and the poor. We're almost at the point of having systems that would allow the poor to electronically receive remittances, foreign aid, and social safety net payments, as well as their earnings, and then be allowed to save and transact freely. Once more countries enable these technologies, the innovation may turn out to be as big an advance in development policy as the ones that allowed people to move from a barter economy to a market economy. Global development is a complex challenge, but if we stay focused and keep our mission in mind, I'm confident we can help improve outcomes. At the World Bank Group, we have a strong culture grounded in our founding principles and embodied by our hardworking staff. It's important that we are open and transparent about how we do our work and the results we achieve. I want staff and stakeholders to feel they have the freedom to raise issues in a culture of open, candid communication. Our mission is urgent. Our shareholders have given us clear guidance through the capital increase package and have set high development ambition for IDA 19. The IDA 19 proposals cannot be achieved without the strong support of all development partners. I thank our IDA partners for their commitment and generosity. I'm confident that working together, we can create better conditions with stronger policy frameworks and more robust institutions aimed at broad-based growth that reduces poverty and boosts shared prosperity. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malpass. At this time, I would now like to call on the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Ms. Georgieva, to address the governors. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, governors, distinguished guests. I am honored and humbled to speak for the first time as a managing director of the IMF, and even more so in the presence of Jim Wolfensohn, whose tenure at the World Bank brought the fight against poverty at the center of the institution and left such a mark for all of us to follow. I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to take over from a remarkable woman whose vision and leadership have lifted up the fund, made the institution stronger, more innovative, more relevant. Thank you, Christine. And many thanks to David Lipton, who so ably led the fund during a transition period. I'm delighted to share the stage with Ayaz Sayed Khayyam, the chair of the Board of Governors, and with David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, who was a great boss and is going to be a great partner. I want to begin by quoting one of the founding fathers of the Bretton Woods institutions, John Maynard Keynes, who once said, "Economics is essentially a moral science and not a natural science. That is to say, it employs introspection and judgments of value." These words speak volumes about the IMF and its staff. For all their methodical work, fund staff are guided by their commitment to improving people's lives. They are not just employing judgments of value. They are seeking to add real value. In everything we do, we aim to make a clear connection between our work and the benefits it brings for the economies and the people of our member countries. I have seen firsthand when the IMF supported my own country, Bulgaria, in its economic transformation from crisis to recovery to more jobs and higher living standards. And I have seen time and again how ordinary people benefit when transitions are well managed, when the IMF is playing its essential role in promoting sound policies for inclusive and sustainable growth. I am mindful of the responsibility that comes with my position, especially at the time of accelerating change in technology, in climate, in the nature of work, just to name a few. In this environment, I think of the IMF as being an important transmission line, transmission of knowledge, financial resources, good policies, capacity development, a wealth of experience and tools that help countries embrace the benefits of change and reduce the risks of falling behind. Being able to transmit the right signals is always important, but even more so when the world economy faces headwinds. Indeed, after a synchronized upswing, we are now facing a synchronized slowdown. A deceleration in nearly 90% of the world's economies means that growth this year is expected to reach only 3%, its lowest rate since the beginning of the decade. Yes, the global economy is still growing, but it is growing too slowly. This is partly because trade tensions are now taking a toll on business confidence and investment. Add to this other forces of uncertainty, a Brexit. We all hope that this cloud of uncertainty may evaporate. Let's see. Geopolitical tensions, all they are a drag on growth. And to this, we also have to add demographic pressures and record high debt levels. This all spells troubling medium-term outlook, especially in countries already facing difficulties, among them some of the fund's program countries. We estimate that 45 developing countries, they're home to almost 1 billion people, will grow more slowly in per capita terms than the advanced world. Instead of catching up, those countries are set to fall further behind. To meet this challenge, we need to step up cooperation within and across borders. What does that mean? It means that countries must work together to find a lasting solution on trade and keep tensions from spilling over into other critical areas, such as currencies and technology. Here, the recent announcement by the United States and China is a step in the right direction. The goal should be to move from trade truce to trade peace, to build a better trade system, one that is fairer, more innovative, more inclusive. We also need to build consensus at home to ensure that a more balanced approach is taken to support growth. Slower growth requires that monetary policy remains supportive, but we all recognize that it cannot do the job alone. Even Christine Lagarde cannot, on her own, solve the problems that lay on the path of a slow growth. Even her. So when space is available, fiscal policy must play a more active role. Above all, as David Malpass said so clearly, we need to be committed to structural reforms that can boost productivity and resilience. Think of lowering barriers to entry in service sectors, tackling gender discrimination in the labor market, modernizing legal frameworks to reduce red tape and fight corruption. Structural reforms are never easy to do. They require sometimes fighting entrenched, strong interests. and they require paying careful attention to the impact on vulnerable people. But they are critical to avoid getting stuck in mediocre growth and to promote productivity, job creation, higher incomes. How can we at the IMF support you in these efforts? By further strengthening the connection between policies and people's lives, by delivering results for you. So let me spell out 3 priorities our team has set. First, to focus on economic fundamentals. For fund staff, that is always the starting point, always recognizing that sound economic policies are not an end in itself. They are means to build more prosperous societies. I have personally witnessed the power of good policies, but also the impact of bad policies. During Bulgaria's currency crisis in the mid-90s, I saw my mother losing 98% of her life savings because of hyperinflation. And this is something I always remember when I look at economic reform programs. And I'm pleased to see that the staff of the IMF is very attentive to how we can support our members in their pursuit of good, sound economic policies. I want to give one example, Jamaica. We had 2 IMF support programs. They have delivered tangible results, a reduction in public debt by 50% of GDP, historically low unemployment, inflation stability. And I also want to congratulate the government of Jamaica for being very creative on how it would bring society on board using reggae music to communicate the benefits of low inflation. Sing and dance your way through trouble. This focus on results has been driving the ongoing progress in the fund's approach, improving the design of our lending programs, including expanding support for low-income countries at 0 interest, upgrading our surveillance to enhance the quality of the policy advice that stems from it, and further integrating capacity development with surveillance and lending. Given the precarious outlook for the world economy, we must go further. This means even more focus on countries that would be affected most in a downturn, among them fragile states. This means using our tools even more effectively in precautionary posture. And it means, above all, making our efforts ever more attuned to individual country circumstances, so we can deliver better services to you. Our second priority is to focus on what matters most to people in their daily lives: better jobs, higher wages, greater access to finance, more opportunities for women, more opportunities for young people. These are all areas where we need more potent reforms, more public and private investments. And this would help countries to make their economies both more competitive and more inclusive. The goal is to unlock the full potential of human capital in all countries. In other words, we need to put in action our conviction that if you want to be wealthy tomorrow, you have to invest in your people today. It is so exciting, and I want to thank Christine, that the fund has significantly stepped up its engagement on social spending issues. In Ghana, helping to create fiscal space for more education spending. In Georgia, supporting efforts to increase the minimum public pension. In Egypt, helping to expand a cash transfer program for poorer households. And in many countries, helping to boost public revenues so there is ample space for social spending, and more broadly, ample space for progress to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We will maintain this momentum. We will continue to build on the fund's strength. Our global membership gives us a unique cross-country perspective and a unique perspective over time, 75 years of history. And this history teaches us that our success depends on strong partnerships, including with other organizations and most importantly with our sister organization, the World Bank. Think about what we have done together already in debt relief, in financial stability assessments across a broad range of countries, in effective engagement on fintech. And I commit to you that with David Malpass, we will further expand our collaboration in key macro-critical areas as well as on the ground in program countries. And that brings me to my third and last priority, reinvigorating international cooperation. I have always admired the IMF, like the bank, an institution so strongly committed to build bridges between nations. Even as some countries become more reluctant to reach out across borders, the global economy is becoming ever more intertwined. So many issues can be effectively addressed only by us working together. Action on climate is one of them. And I want to echo the chair for his passionate call on us to embrace climate action. This is what we do at the Fund. We are committed to continue working on mitigation and adaptation, on carbon pricing, on building resilience. Action on trade also requires more international cooperation, not less. And the same goes for corporate taxation, financial regulation, fighting money laundering, fighting the financing of terrorism. And in this moment of heightened uncertainty, we also need a strong global financial safety net with the IMF well-resourced at the center. This is a top priority, always, but especially when the world economy is slowing down. So I'm so very pleased to announce that our shareholders early this morning, starting at 7:30, endorsed a package to ensure that the fund will continue to have sufficient resources to provide full confidence that it can adequately support our membership, and also that quota and governance reforms will continue under the 16th review. A big round of applause for the shareholders. Being more effective also means continuing to learn from experience and at the same time continuing to modernize the fund, to streamline our systems, to leverage new technology, to further increase the diversity of our staff. Our staff, the fund's greatest asset, your greatest asset. And I want to thank them profoundly for their incredible work. I am so proud of you. I want to thank the management team, and I want to thank our executive board, not least for your trust in electing me in this position. Thank you. Serving our 189 members, large and small, rich and poor, this is the greatest honor of my life. As someone who grew up behind the Iron Curtain, I could have never expected to lead the IMF. And that experience holds a very simple lesson. Nothing is impossible. Change is unstoppable. We are the stewards of our destiny, and we can chart a course towards a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goreva. Let us now, ladies and gentlemen, turn to the formal business of the institutions. We have before us the reports and recommendations of the Joint Procedures Committee. Report 1 covers the business of the Bank, IFC, and IDA. Report 2 covers the business of the Fund. And Report 3 concerns matters of common interest to all the organizations. We also have the report of the Procedures Committee of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. On the recommendations of the Joint Procedures Committee and the MEGA Procedures Committee, I propose that the adoption of these reports and the recommendations contained therein be adopted. As there are no objections, the reports and recommendations are adopted. On matters related to the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, I ask Mr. Malpass, as Chair of ICSID's Administrative Council, to take the floor for his brief intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll do it from here if I may.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm honored to open this 53rd annual meeting of the ICSID Administrative Council. The two items on the ICSID agenda this year call for the adoption of resolutions by the Council to approve the 2019 ICSID annual report and to adopt the administrative budget for fiscal year 2020. The draft resolutions have been distributed to the members. I propose that the draft resolutions on the ICSID 2019 annual report and the ICSID administrative budget for the fiscal year 2020 be adopted. Without objection, the resolutions are adopted. I hereby adjourn the 2019 annual meeting of ICSID's Administrative Council.
Thank you, Mr. Malpass. I would like to take this opportunity now to thank the governors of the World Bank Group and the Fund for the honor to have served as chair of this joint session, and I thank you for your support and cooperation. Allow me also to express my deep appreciation to Mr. Malpass and Ms. Goreva for their leadership in our two institutions. I also appreciate the commitment of the staffs of the Bank Group and the Fund for carrying out the vital work of these institutions. I would also like to thank Ms. Shikata and Mr. Lin, as well as the staff of the Secretariat of both institutions for the successful organization of these meetings. I would also like to further thank the two vice chairs, the governors for Canada and South Africa. I wish to congratulate the governor for Ghana, who has been selected to chair for the coming year. I wish all the governors and delegates a fruitful and productive meeting period over the next few days and a safe journey home after the completion of our work. I look forward to seeing you next year again in Washington, D.C. I hereby adjourn this meeting of the 2019 annual meetings of the Board of Governors of the IBRD, IDA, IFC, and MEGA, and the IMF. Thank you.